from the campus of the University of Pennsylvania Wharton School. This is Knowledge at Wharton on Business Radio. Here's your host, Dan Loney.
Hey, hi, everybody. Welcome back. Brand new week here on Sirius XM 111. Business Radio powered by the Wharton School. Great to have you with us. Monday, March the 9th. As we mentioned at the top of the show in our rundown, the website Etsy has been growing since it was launched a decade ago, and its recent success has many people believing in it so much that their upcoming IPO could be even bigger than some projections out there right now. To look at what is expected, joining us on the phone, Ken Wisnefski, who is the president and CEO of WebiMax.com, and also with us, Sharif Pendleton, who is a Philadelphia-based artist who has been selling his creations on the Etsy since 2006. Great to have you both on the show here today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning.
Great. Ken, I'll start with you. What do you see being out there in the business world for the future of Etsy if, in fact, they decide and are able to pull this all together?
I think that Etsy has been something that's really been an interesting platform. It's kind of taken some of the value that an eBay would have in the fact that it allowed businesses that maybe don't have their own web properties or kind of ability to sell online and really created a niche platform to be able to kind of sell those products and, had really built its brand around that. I actually think that the talk of the IPO and kind of making that kind of more known actually is bringing even more awareness to the platform itself, and I think obviously in this particular case would be a very good thing, I think, for everyone that's involved with the platform, including the people that sell their products on there.
I was going to ask you what really makes it an attractive IPO possibility right now, and obviously where we are. I mean, we've had a very good growth in terms of the levels and numbers of IPOs over the last few years, and this website seems like it has a niche that would draw a lot of attention.
I definitely agree. And obviously, I think there's a lot of interest and intrigue out there because having a definitive web property, an e-commerce platform, requires a lot of resource and time in some cases. And I think that Etsy really kind of panders towards the people that want to focus on their product and what they're kind of working on and kind of that sort of the side of things, and allows them to be the one that kind of facilitates the interest or the people that are there to purchase the product. So I like the niche, and I think there's they've done a good job really kind of identifying with that niche and continuing to kind of stay focused on it.
Sharif, how did you first get started in using Etsy all those years ago?
Actually, a friend of mine was probably selling on it, as I remember, and I think she told me about it. It sounded like a great idea. And as Ken was saying, I was someone who was making things that I needed a way to distribute, to get out there. Mm-hmm. I went, I had a look, I thought it sounded like a great opportunity, and so I joined and just created an online shop. It was pretty simple at the time.
Well, I wanted you to go through the process, exactly how you had to set it up in terms to be able to sell your wares on Etsy.
So initially what happens is, as a creator of something, you sort of have this idea, you're looking for a way to get it out to people. When you discover the website, you read all the materials involved, and I believe the prices now are somewhere around, you pay 20 cents per listing, and I think Etsy charges like 3.25% on every transaction. Mm-hmm. So what you do is you come up with a shop name, you register that shop name if it's available for Etsy. You obviously connect it to your email account, and at the time, I believe also PayPal. And you're pretty much up and running in no time at all.
So how successful have you seen it as a venture for you?
For me personally, it's been good. Etsy, I think, like a lot of things like it, has its ebbs and flows. Yeah. So for my shop, Masters of None, I do very well around the holiday season.
Sure.
And it really just depends on what my product offerings are. So I'm someone who, for example, makes housewares. So there really isn't a season for housewares, but if you do something that's more wedding related during wedding season, you probably do better during different times of the year.
So what has been your plan then? I mean, obviously you make a variety of different things. I would imagine you do set it up so that you try and hit those specific times of the year, obviously Christmas and the holiday season being a big one.
Yeah, so for me, I start doing it's interesting to say that it's research because as someone who's creative, it comes through as sort of inspiration, but it is research about what's being made, what's out there. So
yeah.
Having recognized early on this thing about seasons, I actually started making cufflinks because it's sort of dads and grads, right? So
Sure.
That's the season that, while not pandering in a bad way, trying to make something just to make a dollar, it actually goes with my line of goods. It's something, though, that allows me to take advantage of the fact that I know that people will be shopping on Etsy at certain times of the year. And I continue to make everything else that I make, like coasters, like trivets and things like that throughout the season, throughout every part of the year, and that stuff sells pretty well.
I got to be honest, guys, because I had heard about Etsy, but I had never been on the site till I went on this weekend in preparing to do this interview. And I looked at it, Ken, and the thing is it had some interesting things there. And, you know, they have the wood-crafted signs, which seems like everybody likes these days to hang them in their house, you know, where you have the interesting sayings or, you know, the house rules, that type of thing. So, you know, there is that kind of natural attraction, I would think, to the broader public, even especially when this goes public.
No, I definitely think that's the case. And, you know, I became familiar with Etsy probably about 3 years ago. I was looking for kind of a unique gift for my wife and, you know, kind of wasn't able to find anything, you know, through kind of the normal channels and, you know, kind of stumbled upon Etsy, you know, through kind of a natural search, an organic kind of search on Google and, you know, found myself kind of immersed in looking through a lot of different options and found her something that was, you know, relatively inexpensive and, you know, something that, you know, kind of had more of that, I guess, charm or appeal of being, you know, really kind of unique. And, you know, since that point, you know, I know my wife, you know, utilizes Etsy pretty frequently, and I've made a couple of purchases similar to that on Etsy. But again, I think the awareness out there isn't really super strong. You know, I think that in this particular case, along the lines of some of the other IPOs that have kind of gone out there, you know, Facebook had such a huge brand when the IPO went out there. Everybody was talking about it, and, you know, really, you know, it was already so established. In this particular case, I really see the IPO as being something that's going to bring prominence to Etsy and ultimately be able to grow the user base, but also be able to grow the amount of people that are actually, you know, diligently looking for product on there.
That's interesting because I did want to bring up if whether or not this is the right time for Etsy to really make this push and go public, or do they need to build that brand up even a little bit more? You're suggesting that actually the second will help the first really by performing the IPO.
It seems to be a good time for IPOs in general, and, you know, Etsy's got enough of a name and enough of a critical mass to be able to kind of justify doing the IPO. And, you know, it seems that, you know, the way things have kind of been going is, you know, these kind of companies get themselves into kind of the spotlight. And, you know, most of these IPOs have been, you know, successful. So certainly, you know, even though Etsy operated, I guess, at a relatively small operating loss in comparison to the revenue, you know, you look at some of the other IPOs recently, like HubSpot, that, you know, seem to be losing, you know, a lot of money, but still at a successful IPO. Etsy would seem to be a lot better bet to me personally than, you know, some of the other ones because of the potential.
The e-commerce market has obviously exploded over the last few years, and it continues to grow. And the interesting thing is, really, Ken, is I think we've really just touched the tip of this in terms of the e-commerce market. I think there's so much more that we can go. Not that Etsy right off the bat will be competing. They obviously will in some respects be competing with the Amazons and the eBays of the world. It may take them a little bit of time to build that brand up to that point, but still, why not? If you're an Etsy, get out there, be public, and build that brand even more just because of the way the e-commerce market is.
No, that's definitely true. You know, I think one of the things you look at, and one of the things I think is going to kind of happen over the next 5 years or so here, is going to be really kind of how people begin to shop for different products. And it's going to be more or less that there's going to be kind of classifications where an Etsy, has its niche really focused around kind of the unique product, the things that, you're not going to find on Amazon.
Yeah.
Amazon's going to have somewhat of its niche. eBay still kind of has its niche. So all of these, kind of large-scale e-commerce providers, if you will, are going to have their own niche. And ultimately, I see the same thing going on down the road with search. While, Google's, obviously, owns the market share currently, eventually I think there'll be, kind of smaller subsections for people to be able to search for very specific things as opposed to kind of just the one Walmart, if you will, of search.
844-WHARTON, 844-942-7866 is the number if you'd like to jump in the conversation. I'd like to hear from you, especially if you're an Etsy user. What is it that attracts it to you? We found out from Sharif. We also found out from Ken what attracts it to you. Or is there something out there that you think that they need to fix? Your calls right now, 844-942-7866. And Sharif, I'll throw that question to you. Is there anything that you see that you think that Etsy needs to really look at and maybe adjust?
I think that's a really interesting question. Just listening to what Ken is saying, I think that he's absolutely right in terms of by Etsy going public, it will bring more brand awareness to Etsy and therefore increase the number of users and consumers. And I think something that'll be interesting to watch is the equilibrium that they continue to try to strike, because I think Etsy probably has, a primary consumer and the secondary consumer. And for me, as someone who sells on Etsy, I would consider myself to be a primary user or consumer of Etsy. Secondary are the people who buy from me. So as a seller, something that I see or that I'm kind of wondering how they're going to deal with is the more you open it up, the more people do become aware of it, the more people will want to sell on it. So someone like me, the more sellers you have, the more, the market is sort of flooded with things. And so I think Etsy's problem will be, and it's already started a little bit, is that they're going to need to continue to actually curate what's on the site. So as a secondary consumer, if you do go to Etsy looking for something that's unique, that's what you want to find. What you don't want to find is something, as you're saying, is that perhaps something you can easily find on Amazon, you can easily find somewhere else.
The mass market stuff.
Exactly. And I think as Etsy has grown over the last 10 years, we're already starting to see that a little bit. And what that does do is, in some ways, it edges out people who are, doing boutique manufacturing like me. And I think they're going to need to watch out for that, because what they really will not want to do is actually alienate their early adopters, their real primary users. So I think what they need to start looking at, if they haven't already, and will really need to get diligent about, is actually curating what they actually allow to be on the site.
Ken, I'll ask you the same.
No, I think Sharif makes some great points there along those lines. I know that one of the things that's kind of come up here has been kind of, with this evolution and, kind of taking Etsy from kind of this niche industry, kind of platform that it was into something much bigger in the IPO. Are you kind of losing somewhat of the identity that you initially established? And look, anytime, this question, rose with Facebook when it was, kind of doing the IPO. Was it going to lose its quote-unquote cool factor? Were people that, were indigenous with it suddenly going to want to migrate off it because now it was this big business?
Yeah.
I think in the case of Etsy, I think, this particular scenario, it's just kind of the evolution. And I think for people like Sharif, having more eyes view it, open it up to, potentially more sales and more opportunity for them. And to me, I think, I get it. There's pluses and minuses, but I would have to say, the good far outweighs the bad in this type of scenario.
There is also the fact that they have Etsy has a ranking for its social responsibility work as a B corporation. Ken, what does that mean for Etsy in terms of this whole process with the IPO? Is there any connection? Obviously there is a benefit for a company having that type of a rating, but does it help the company just pushing forward?
It's really interesting because, the B Corp status would be, officially the first company that has that status to do their own IPO. Ben & Jerry's has that status, but they're owned by Unilever, a larger company, so they're not kind of in their own kind of realm there. So there's some intrigue around that, and it's actually something that interested to see kind of how that kind of plays out. But I do think that that model and ultimately that focus that they have, just by evolving the business and kind of trying to grow it, doesn't necessarily mean that they've got to sacrifice their integrity to get that.
Sharif, what do you think? Does that play into anything with what you do on the website in terms of loyalty, in terms of staying with Etsy because of their social responsibility work?
I really do like to. I'll be honest. Initially my reaction is just like, well, it's a little bit separate from what I do. But I have to say that I've recently read. I think that they are starting Etsy.org, which serves to bring. Basically, it helps women and underserved communities become entrepreneurs. Yep. And I actually think that is something that's honorable. I love that happens. And I think if they stay dedicated to that and they let that be known, I think that will actually inspire people like me to stick with Etsy, to really be curious about how they want to continue to do things like that as a larger company that's more connected. Yeah.
844-WHARTON, 844-942-7866 is the number. I'd like to hear from you, especially if you're an Etsy user. Give us a call. Get your opinions. Join in with Sharif and with Ken. I'm Dan Loney. We're coming to you from the campus of the University of Pennsylvania right here on Sirius XM 111, Business Radio, powered by the Wharton School. Ken, it also does bring up, I was reading, an interesting growing light on the tech sector in New York City as well, because we talk so much about California and Silicon Valley. We forget that pretty much tech startups are popping up pretty much everywhere else around the country, let alone New York City.
No, definitely. One of the challenges, I think, to, kind of New York City has always been, kind of the cost structure, the cost of kind of the intensity that's really placed around, having the employees and, just the cost of living in New York is being so high. Yeah. But again, there's different programs and, all areas are trying to facilitate kind of growth in that tech sector. So, New York's definitely caught on to that. And if you notice, most of the companies that are kind of those New York-based type startups, the ones that we're looking at, they're kind of more focused around retail, things that are kind of in that type of sector, and sure. And that's that to me is kind of maybe where they're gaining their identity. Where you look at kind of quote unquote Silicon Valley being more the kind of traditional software type of providers and things along those lines. But I do think nowadays that much like Etsy has a platform that can promote product throughout the entire world, the startups and things are beginning to kind of disenfranchise from necessarily having to be in Silicon Valley like it used to be. Now there's opportunity more around, and the communities themselves are embracing these startups a lot more because they realize that, hey, if we can get some really good backing here and some good startups here, there's a lot of work to be had. There's a lot of kind of buzz that goes along with that, and ultimately the states and the cities are seeing it as opportunistic as well.
And I'm on the website right now, and their information page, as of the end of 2014, 1.4 million active sellers, just under 20 million active buyers, and their merchandise sales in 2014, $1.93 billion. I guess, getting back to the New York aspect of things, Ken and Sharif, I'll start with you, is that when you're talking about a company that is based, basically their headquarters are in Brooklyn, New York, and you have Brooklyn, which has obviously been a really growth area the last few years, and then you also have Soho, and there's a variety of different other areas in New York City. It really does play, just that town alone, to being able to grow this type of a business in that type of a town.
Absolutely, and I can say that I've actually met a couple of people from Etsy at various venues when I'm doing a show in person, and one of the first things they tell you is, hey, here's my card, come and hang out with us. Yeah. So I think the fact that they really play on the fact that they are in a community that is really open to having people in, because I think that it sort of goes to the age of the people who work there, the generation of the people who work there. If you look at any kind of startup, it sort of has that kind of attitude, that sort of swagger about it. Like, hey, we're really open, we're really friendly, come and hang out with us. It's not like, oh, come for a tour.
Yep.
That has a different connotation to it. They literally say, come hang out with us. And what you feel is that they actually mean it, and it helps that it is somewhere like Brooklyn, like New York, where there are walkable neighborhoods even. Like all that kind of plays into the finessing of what that means to come and hang out with them.
Now, what you sell on Etsy is the crafts that you make. Is this your full-time job that you have, or are you doing this as really an addition to another job, and you basically are supplementing the income that you have from another position?
Initially, it was my full-time. It was my full-time job.
Right.
So up until about 2011, and just sort of personally where my business was going, the short story is that I was growing and I had money, but I was sort of like, I went to art school. I didn't quite know how to reinvest that money in myself, so I decided to take a little bit of a step back. And so I had already been in the corporate America, so that's where I am right now, sort of doing 9 to 5. But what Etsy does do, as you said, is it's supplemental income. It is something that, as someone who is a creative that has to go into an office every day, it allows me to actually have an outlet for my creativity. It is something that it allows me to really act on passions. It allows me to connect with people.
Yeah.
There are a lot of benefits to selling on Etsy that probably aren't seen initially, and probably can't quite be described when the time comes to offer it as an IPO.
Yeah. Well, and I wanted to follow that up by asking you: is that the kind of the normal story you hear from talking with other people that may be selling on Etsy? Is that they see it as, well, I'm sure some of them see it as a supplemental situation. Some of them see it as a potential full-time way to try and build out a potential business.
Yeah, in the circles that I'm in terms of the creative community, we sort of look at the people who can sell on Etsy full time as like the lucky ones. It's like, wow, that's so cool that they were able to do that, right? And it's the brass ring that everyone is reaching for. It's like, if I can just put these things into place, and if I can make that my story. And one of the things that Etsy does is offer, I think it's called the section on the website is like quit your day job or something like that. And so I feel like it's probably monthly, they feature a seller who has this story of, hey, I started making this thing, I sold this many things on Etsy, I got discovered, and I quit my day job. And it's those stories that when you really get immersed in the Etsy community, like you drink the Kool-Aid, you buy into it, you're like, oh my God, like I can do this.
Yeah.
It's nice to have that as a goal. I do think that it is difficult, and I think that again, in terms of creatives and things like that, not every person who can make something that is beautiful or useful has the skills to then turn that into a business.
Yeah.
But it is really encouraging to see that people do it.
How much do you think that Etsy will change? I mean, I don't think it'll change much as a business, but how much do you think it could potentially grow with a public listing? Or do you think it would, I mean, obviously the brand will be out there a little bit more, but do you think the growth will even matter, or will it continue to grow as the way it has, Sharif, over the last few years?
I think it'll probably, there'll be an increase in growth. I think what happens is Etsy hit the scene. It was extremely unusual as a business model, especially for people like me who were trying to get their goods out there.
Yep.
Then they had a little bit of competition over the years. I don't think anyone has quite done as well or as Etsy has done.
Yep.
And I think, going back to what Ken was saying earlier, the fact that this is going to bring brand awareness sort of recenters or refocuses our attention on Etsy, and it'll cause people to look at it with a fresh eye. So maybe people who walked away from it before because it wasn't working for them, or people who have only sort of heard about it a little bit but was curious, I think those people will now really say, hey, oh, this is a real thing. This is a real business.
Yeah.
It'll bring a lot of attention, and it'll inspire people. It'll cause people to go there, log in, and see what they can do for themselves.
Ken, what do you see as Etsy post-IPO?
No, I see the same. I see a lot more awareness, and Dan, you made a good point. You're immersed in kind of this world every day, and you mentioned, hey, I was on it for the first time the other day.
Yeah.
So I think you're a good example of just that awareness getting out there. People really that probably haven't been exposed to it are now going to kind of be more engaged with it. I think it adds more products to it over time, but I also think in the short term, it definitely adds a lot more eyes from the buyer perspective coming onto the site very quickly.
Gentlemen, thanks very much. Greatly appreciate the time. All the best.
Thank you very much.
Great to have you. Ken Wisnefski, who is the president and CEO of WebiMax, and Sharif Pendleton, who is a Philadelphia-based artist who's been selling creations on Etsy for the last several years.